Well, good morning. This is Suzanne Hanifin with Acumen Executive Search with Tanis Morris.
Hi there.
And we are so lucky today to have Dawn Jagger with us, who's going to be kind of going through her background, her learnings. But let me kind of give a little bit of background on Dawn. She is a lawyer, went to U of O, and Dawn has spent her entire career in civil service and has worked up through many different departments within the state of Oregon. You came from the insurance division, the consumer and business services, and then you spent a lot of time at the Oregon Health Authority. When you left Oregon Health Authority as chief of staff, you moved on now to federal government, and now you are with the Administration for Children and Family Services. And what an interesting, again, career decisions to stay as a civil servant. And we'd love to kind of turn this conversation over to you to kind of walk us through your journey and share with us those deciding moments.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me here. It's been a pleasure getting to know both of you and meeting you. Sure. So it starts a long time ago, right? So my grandmother on my mom's side was essentially a civil servant, what we would call today somebody who's like a social worker in a hospital navigating systems, right? Navigating systems for her community as an immigrant in Chicago. So really doing work that we talk about today needing, right? So when you're in crisis, you're in a hospital, you don't know how to access services, et cetera. So that's really that's just always been in me. And it's part of my upbringing is that we just need to do good, especially when I have so many things that are available to me that I have access to. I don't have as many stumbles as other people do necessarily. Then I better be doing good with the work that with what's presented in front of me. So really, it's kind of always been in the background. You do something in service, you're volunteering, you're doing something. And then like anybody in high school and college, I did not want to do what my parents did. So I said over and over and over again, I will never be a lawyer. I'm not going to do it. Never going to go to law school. All these things, right, that you say because both my parents were attorneys. And I have two brothers who are engineers, a sister who's a midwife, but everyone I wouldn't call us all activists, but certainly engaged and constantly questioning to try to make whatever system we're in better. And so again, I was saying, heck no, I'm not gonna go into anything. But then I worked for, after college, I worked for a presidential campaign, and I realized that everybody developing policy in the presidential campaign, they were all lawyers. And so what I realized was I want nothing to do with a courtroom, and I don't want to litigate. I don't like that contention, but I did want to be able to influence policy, influence politics. I saw the connection between where policy was stumbling or had some mishaps and wasn't serving folks very well. And I thought, well, if there's a way to change that, if there's a way to change those policies and that kind of thing, it's through becoming a lawyer. You got to figure out the system before you can change it. So really, that was kind of the first shift, pivot, whatever we want to call it, but truly always inside me to figure out. So I went to law school, and then just based on personal experiences, I knew that I wanted to be in the area of this intersection of health, behavioral health, mental health services, addiction, and criminal justice. Because to me, when you take a huge step back, looking at treating and serving folks who are experiencing mental illness through the criminal justice system just didn't make sense. So I wanted to jump into that space, but I didn't know where. I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have somebody saying, oh, this is the agency, this is the nonprofit, this is where you should go to be able to engage in these kinds of conversations. So I just figured, you know what? I can always work hard. I will work hard no matter where I am. So I might as well jump in somewhere in health, criminal, name the area. And it just so happened I started at an insurance division where they regulated health insurance plans. And I figured you got to start somewhere. And then, I do work really, really hard. And I quickly was able to meet folks who were able to put me in different leadership positions. And then that really is you named the trajectory since then. But just always questioning the systems that we have to be able to figure out how on earth do we make them serve folks better, and making lots of mistakes along the way. But that's a little bit about my journey.
Well, yeah. Fascinating. I know that in and of itself leads to so many questions.
Sure.
But how fascinating, and what an interesting journey you've been on thus far. So along the way, what would you say were the most formative leadership experiences that that you went through, was there a particular mentor or situation that really taught you about leadership? Or name a number of them.
Yeah. So I'll just name, there have been so many folks in my life who have helped me both professionally and personally, but kind of all in the same areas of it's all leadership development. So whether it was a coach in basketball, right? I played lots and lots of sports. So figuring out how do you engage with teammates? How do you engage with referees, right? Like all these things are actually all for me instilling leadership qualities. So lots of coaches, lots of different folks. But where I always come back to is, so my mother is an incredible leader, and whether it was like how she went about dinner table conversations, how she engaged us as kids to say, no, you guys have autonomy, you have authority to ask questions, and there's systems, and here's how you navigate this. So she's just unbelievably formative. But I guess the biggest thing is being an executive at the Oregon Health Authority during COVID. Right.
Oh
so that is So I was part of the small team of folks here in Oregon who led the state agency, and obviously at the direction of the governor, but who led that day in and day out during COVID. And so that, I had already been a leader for a bit, but to do that type of work 24/7 in a global pandemic was formative, lots and lots of stumbles that I can go through all of that. We failed miserably in a whole bunch of ways as leaders in Oregon, and we also were unbelievably successful. And really, it's all a testament to who Oregonians are. But that right there is a process, and I'm happy to describe kind of two features that I use to kind of like grade myself, and we talk about as leaders. So one was, right, you talk about service and like why I'm in service. And I so deeply believe that government should be used for good, right? Like it needs to be there for folks when they need it. It doesn't have to be overly expansive, but it needs to be there. And so when I look back at the pandemic and the executive leadership in particular, I think of two things. One is, did we meet folks' needs in the moment? So were we able to help prevent deaths? Were we able to help keep hospitals open? And in a lot of categories, we were, right? A lot of the after action reports, like Oregon did better than most other states, actually. But in the other category, which I think about a lot, is when this happens again, or when another emergency happens again, did we grow as government in trust building? Did we become more trustworthy so that folks rely on our words next time? Or did we kind of erode that trust? And for me, there's a breakdown with different communities, right? Different communities experienced Oregon's government and national government differently. And that to me is disappointing, right? Disappointing in my own actions. I want to be really curious and explore, where did those stumbles happen? How did those disconnects happen? How did they grow? Where did they erode, right? Mm-hmm. All of those kinds of questions. Because to me, it's the concept, you have to have both of those things. You got to act in the moment, but you also have to, we all know something else is going to happen. So are we better off? Are we neutral? Or are we worse off than we were? And I think it really depends on which community you ask, mm-hmm. and how we were able to respond. So those are some of the answers to your question.
And then I'm just curious, to expand on that a tiny little bit. How do you think those experiences shaped you? What did you personally take away from them as a leader?
I learned to trust my gut so much more than ever before. Mm-hmm. That is truly, that's the biggest thing, mm-hmm. is that I think that whether it's through law school or whatever it was, trusting your gut is something that was programmed out of me. It was not necessarily valued. And it's something, though, that is actually a complete data point. It is a complete data point of what I'm experiencing in the moment, what other folks are experiencing in the moment, right? We talked earlier, and I talk a lot about, like, it's actually also an intergenerational experience, right? Folks, the science is finally catching up with what cultures have known for a long time, which is our DNA is filled with our ancestors, right? And they also are in our gut and what it is that our gut is telling us. So trusting that gut moment and then acting. And acting can literally mean I need to say pause to a conversation. I don't have to know the answer. In fact, as a leader, I rarely know the answer, but I know who to ask, right? I'm the type of leader who's a generalist, who makes sure that I bring teams together. I never need to know the answer. I want people around me who are way smarter than me in areas, right? And then I just know, though, that what my job is to ask that question, to pause the conversation, to bring in somebody who I can sense and feel has also that gut feeling that they're uncomfortable with, with, but for some reason they're not speaking up, that's my obligation then to be the one to say, actually, you know what, let's set a pause. And actually, I know this person well enough to know I don't call you out. I let the space be whatever it needs to be to then have you bring in your thoughts, experience, whatever, and then amplify, right? All of those kind of nuances to conversation that gets us to a better place, a better decision, that kind of thing. So that's kind of the main takeaways, I would say.
No, and you lead beautifully into the next question, which is we all have the sense of values, and they are internalized, and they show up through our leadership. And so when you look at you, what are those values that you carry with you, and how have you operationalized them into everyday work?
Well, I've messed up 9 million bajillion times. I'll start with that, right? But it's this, I think folks talk a lot about owning your mistakes. And for me, it's always about exploring them, because ownership feels like control sometimes. And like, oh, I have this little box where I have to name that I messed up here, but then nobody actually asked questions about it, right? And for me, it's always about how do you explore? So to your question about how do you have the values and turn those into operations? So let's take, for example, vaccine rollout, right? So if we're asking an operations question, let's just talk about it. So, or we can talk about an operation. So we had started off in COVID with lots of decisions about the general population, right? So generally Oregon is a white state, but there is a lot of diversity underneath that, and a lot of groups that are not necessarily represented at decision-making tables. But the value that the leadership team brought and the values that I bring is the number of folks is not what matters. What matters is that government is taking care of people, especially folks who are most vulnerable, and that we are listening to what it is that they need. And it was that first step of not listening that we were not right. We weren't taking action. We heard things, but we weren't taking action because there were so many competing priorities, competing values. But really, for me, it is about, are we actually supporting folks where they are? Is government doing good? Are we creating more barriers, actually, to actually having folks be able to access the services that they need? So, right, lots and lots of stumbles at the beginning of COVID. And so at the beginning of part of the vaccine rollout, and we'll set aside prioritization of groups, what we said, though, was how on earth are folks going to access this, right? So we know that there's plenty of folks who have access to their primary care provider. They're able to go to their doctor, right? But we also know that folks who have that relationship with their primary care provider are primarily affluent. They're primarily white. So there's a whole demographic for Oregonians that don't have that. So how on earth are we getting vaccine access, which we all know we need to have, or some right there at that moment, that was a priority. How do we then actually have that be accessible to folks? Well, one of the ideas thrown out was, well, let's have some sort of events in parking lots. And then we're thinking, why, like, how is that a trusted source? Who wants to go to a park, right? It's this kind of thing. So it's engaging in the conversations and then saying, you know what, I will actually listen to what it is that community members wanted. So whether it's going to churches, whether it's going to barbershops, whether it's going to the farms and farm workers where folks needed to have this information, how do we go to you so that we're actually getting this information? And then on the back end of operationalizing, right? That's a lot of work for staff. That is a lot of work to shift trajectory, to rather than have a policy that's for the entire state, say, we actually need to have some focus. We need to have focused in community listening, and it's not just listening, it's then backed up with action and those feedback loops, right? We talk about continuous quality improvement all the time, but we typically don't associate that with community engagement or actually like responding to community. It's like, oh, this system over here. No. Let's actually apply those principles that we know so well, and let's put that into this community engagement process, and let's learn how to do that differently. So there's an entire change management process for all the staff who are already dealing with COVID, they're dealing with their family members, they're dealing with remote, like all these different things. And now on top of that, we're saying the way that we've done work has actually contributed to these inequities that exist right now. So let's shift. Doesn't mean anybody meant to do it, doesn't mean it's on purpose, nothing like that. But we do need to make that intentional shift, which is really uncomfortable for a lot of folks. So then moving that, then you continue. I could talk for hours about operations because that is where I live and breathe. But it's really through those conversations.
Well, and you use some key words throughout this. Earlier, the word was curiosity, and I thought that was interesting when you are talking about such a structured operational approach, there's a methodology that you're using, and curiosity doesn't necessarily fit, but yet it does, because you're asking yourself, is this the best way?
Yeah.
Is this the best way? What else do we have? But you also talked about trust as a core value. So when you're looking at trust, again, you're going beyond you and your coworkers' relationship. It is community. So looking back now that COVID is over,
Right.
what are those key learnings that you had from that?
Yeah. So I think that probably the first thing that always pops up when I think about learnings and just the journey is really, and I hate this word, but there isn't a better English word. It's just this resiliency, this constant fight in people that I think sometimes is undervalued, and we just don't help folks. And so I appreciate you reflected back to me the words trust and curiosity, because I am a feelings, values-based leader, right? I don't lead from subject matter expertise. I lead from a space of interpersonal connection. I lead with growth and with compassion for the person who's in front of me. And it's genuine, because I genuinely think most people are in the jobs that they're in because they're really good at it and they want to be there. And it's really, for me, about how do I help support you in that space? What has happened for you to not necessarily be able to show up as who you are in whatever meeting it might be, right? And so for me, I'm shifting to that, because to this the values part of this, because it's back to trusting my gut. I knew that leadership for me, and leadership during times of absolute chaos and turmoil, it's going to be based on relationships. Nobody is going to work 24 hours in a row for me, or for the organization, or for the state of Oregon over and over and over again because of punching a clock. It is because they feel an obligation to do this work. They feel like they need to be here. They feel like they can be a part of something that's bigger than themselves, right? That's the thing that helps people show up every day, especially in that heightened level of crisis. And so that's what we wanted to demonstrate, right? I always wanted to demonstrate, and I continue to always want to demonstrate just this, I just value the person in front of me, and I value getting to know them as a person, and I value meeting them where they're at and then helping us grow and helping us figure out, all right, where do we need to go from there? So it's kind of a mishmash of an answer to your question, but it's all these pieces that just kind of come together.
Well, it kind of beautifully leads into the next question, because I love the sensibility you're bringing to your work, that very personal approach. And I was thinking, when Suzanne was talking about curiosity, trust, personal relationships, those aren't necessarily qualities that lend themselves to big governmental operations. So I know that the organization that you work for and the ones that you have worked for, these big government bodies, they also have their mission. So how do you weave your approach to your work into that broader organizational mission? And then the beautiful thing is, this is about extending beyond the walls of the workplace into the community, which is literally what your job is. So, so if I'm making sense,
no, you totally are.
The question is, how do you kind of marry the individual value set with the broader organizational mission, and then set it forth,
Yeah. So people and any large organization, what we're really good at mucking up is taking an individual problem and then trying to solve it systemically. We add so many layers of silliness to a process, whatever. We forget the original purpose. We just add so many layers of ridiculousness. And then not only are we trying to solve one problem, but then you're trying to solve that one problem in a system that is crazy, crazy, crazy complicated, right? So everything that happens in a state agency or in a government, right, really started from some individual having a problem, some legislator getting a phone call, the governor's office getting a phone call, right? Something real happened. Some failure was happening, right? Somebody was trying to do the right thing, trying to figure something out, trying to problem solve. But then we have systems come into play. We have rules, regulations, policies. But for me, instead of getting bogged down and overwhelmed by that, I'm like, well, somebody created all these in the first place. So they actually can be changed. And they actually have probably been changed before, but it just takes the time, the discipline to figure out. So, all right, what is it that we actually need to do? And then not get lost in the starting point of why it is that we're doing something and not get lost in those layers of bureaucracy. And so for me, what is helpful is reminding folks of why they're there in the first place, especially in government work, right? Because folks get both overwhelmed and hopeless, and then that leads to the inaction. That leads to adding more layers of bureaucracy. That leads to adding the kind of protectionist mindset that folks get into because they are worried about taking a risk. They are worried. But if you kind of recalibrate what taking a risk means, right? For me, the risk is in the fact that that individual was failed by government. Something messed up, not a judgment, not anything like that, but something, we miss some, right? Something's not happening. Somebody's not being protected. So that risk is for that individual and the family and the community. And so rather than think about it being risky for us to change a policy to the unknown, right? Because there's always going to be unknowns. Why aren't we just saying, well, this thing that was happening right here, so take, for example, somebody can't access services because interpretive services aren't paid for. So somebody in downtown Portland needs some sort of mental health services, but they don't speak English, but the organization who's coming to help them doesn't speak their language, and for some reason, they don't pay to actually do this, so you can't, right? So we have a big system failure right here. So how is it that we can take that moment and make sure that we're actually paying for the right things so that a service that might actually be available, but just not in somebody's language, not culturally relevant to what they need, how do we make all those changes? And it's amazing how when you bring it back to the story of the individual, the community member, right, into something that's tangible, folks want to act. Folks are able to then pull the policies that they know and understand, their expertise, and say, oh, wow, I can actually fix this problem for somebody. Oh, wow, I am actually making a meaningful difference, right? And then that's when their ideas come about. Because workers, especially in state government, who have been there for a decade, 2 decades, they've seen it, but what they've also seen is the inaction. Yeah. And that inaction creates, hopelessness, which makes perfect sense. Anybody who's been in that position would feel hopeless and would stop acting, right? And so then the moment that they're able to see, oh my gosh, not only am I empowered to change this thing for this family, I actually have these other 24 ideas that haven't been acted on, that I haven't brought up in 20 years. Maybe I can raise my hand and do it again. And for me, those are the moments of curiosity. Those are the moments that I pause any conversation for. Those are the moments that I applaud. Those are the moments that I encourage. Those are the moments that I live for. Because it is never my idea. Back to the point, my life has been unbelievably privileged. I am not failing. Services are not coming to me. I am there. So I don't know what these ideas necessarily are, but I always want to create an environment where folks are able to bring those up, whether they're, to the last part of your question, whether it's community members, right, whether it is staff, right? It's actually the same process. And that, for me, is why it is so critically important that we build that trust and trustworthiness of government so that community can continue to bring those ideas, because they already have. We just didn't act. We decided not to act. We decided to put it on a shelf. So it's all that kind of push and pull. And for me, it's all about, how do I support creating an environment that keeps those ideas coming, and especially the action associated with it? How do we keep that momentum going? And then it just builds on itself. Is the coolest thing. I'm like, can I just not have a job? I don't need, y'all do it. Y'all are the ones who know these things.
No, that is absolutely beautiful. And I will say, as a resident of Oregon, I wish all the leaders looked at it through that lens of solving problems and, again, creating action, because it is easy to put things on a shelf.
It is.
Yeah. And so let's take this and talk about teams and how you build teams and how do you mentor the next generation up?
Yeah. It's a funny thing to think, next generation, because I'm always the younger person typically in I never work on my own. It's another reason why I never wanted to be a lawyer or a litigator, because the idea of like a solo practice or anything like that, or being alone in a courtroom, right? That's just not the space that I am comfortable. And that's something that has taken me a minute to realize that actually that's not where I thrive. I need to be in conversation. I'm a verbal processor. I need teammates. I need folks to question my assumptions. I need to get really good at explaining my thought process so folks can poke holes throughout the entirety of my thought process, right? So I'll start with teams are where that's my jam. That is where I'd always prefer to be rather than any sort of individual work. And so for me, team building is my favorite. Back to playing basketball or whatever it is, or coaching basketball. My girlfriends and I have coached 5th grade boys basketball. It's just, that to me is one of my favorite things to do, is build teams. And I think that the job of a leader of a team is to create that dynamic where the team actually loves, cares for, and holds each other accountable. Mm-hmm. I think about it a lot like with siblings, right? My siblings and I, and literally what my mother did for us. Like, how is it that we actually learn to care for one another? Because then that translates to everything else. How do we hold each other accountable? And not in a shame way, not in a gotcha way, nothing like that. How do we know each other's individual strengths and challenges and areas of growth, areas of exploration? How do we know the je ne sais quoi, the reason of essence, right? Why are we here? How do we actually connect with people on that level so that we know when somebody's quiet on a Zoom call, it doesn't mean they don't have an idea. It actually means something else is going on either in their personal life, or it means something is happening in the meeting that they're uncomfortable with, and we all need to pause and take that moment. Or maybe it'll turn out that person doesn't like it when the attention is on them. But what is critical to me is that the team figures that out and I step back. Right? So my job at the beginning is to lead with that and to set that example and explain what I am doing, right? That is what I do constantly. So whether I'm in a new meeting, whether I'm in a new team dynamic, I will be in the middle of something. I'll feel the things that happen in my body when I'm like, I don't really like the direction of this. And then I say it. I say, hey, think we need a pause. Hey, guess what? I don't actually know what it is that's making me uncomfortable in this moment, but something is. And then, every time, 3 heads are going to nod because they were feeling the same thing. Oh, interesting. Think this might be the reason that I'm actually feeling this discomfort. Oh, actually, I think it might be this thing. Oh, you know what? Probably not the first thing that I just said, but thanks for letting me get that out of my body so that the other thing could come to fruition and I could figure out what's actually going on. And then the moment that everybody else takes over is the perfect moment. That's when, because I don't, right? But I'm just loud enough and assertive enough that I don't get nervous in those first few moments where, that's not everybody else's strength. So that to me is where why I think that I'm in these positions of leadership that I'm in, is to say that first thing, to take that first step so that we have that different environment where everybody else can step in and come up with something else beautiful that I don't really need to have anything to do with, honestly.
And so when you hire, what are those characteristics and values that you look for in an individual when building those teams?
Yeah, I look for core values. And what does that core value look like showing up in groups? So for me, it is, you can have a core value of service. You can have a core value of working to address inequities. You can have a core value of just whatever it is, right? I think we all have these core values, but in a leadership position, the obligation, especially in government, I think becomes different because you have to act on them. You can't actually let the moments go by when a policy or something is in development that is counter to that value, right? So when you have that moment go by and you say nothing, to me, that is on you, right? To me, that is on the leader who decided not to say something, who decided not to speak up. Then you're contributing to the status quo, which is causing these inequities, which is causing there to be these disparities, whether it's rural and urban, et cetera. So for me, it is, do you have the value? Do you have what are those values? And then what does it look like to speak up about them? What does it look like to build buy-in? What does it look like when there is a barrier to addressing that, right? What does that actually look like? How does it look to you to actually act on this? And have you done that before? And then where are all your stumbles? Because that to me is those are the critical pieces for me, because especially in large agencies that are doing a whole bunch of things, we have the experts, we have the subject matter experts, we have the policy folks, we have folks who can answer specific questions, right? And so for me, it really is about like, how do you bring folks together? How do you question? How do you have that curiosity? And then how do you move something forward? That's what I kind of look for.
Well, honestly, I feel like I'm sitting here listening to the next governor of Oregon or something. I know that's not what you want, but I'm like, wow, this is such a beautiful approach to public policy.
First time I'm uncomfortable. It's all good.
I shouldn't have said it. I went there.
No, I appreciate it. It's all
so
good.
Then we can all have a good laugh.
But I'm happy to talk about why that path might not be the right direction, and like how I want to help other folks and be encouraged to be in that space. Like that, absolutely. I mean, I believe in service. I believe in what it can do, and all of those things. So yes, you feel free to ask your question. I just had to laugh.
Well, no, it's okay.
It was a path.
I didn't mean to
no, you're
make
fine.
it uncomfortable. Yeah,
not even
we can talk about it quickly. That might be more interesting. The question I was going to ask you is, what advice would you give to your younger self? You're very young and you've accomplished a lot in a relatively shorter amount of time than most people in your position. So if you want to marry those two questions, I mean, because it sounded like when we spoke earlier that you did initially think you would go into So
leadership roles. Yeah, I did. So I absolutely, right, back to why did I go to law school in the first place, right? So policy change, people actively talking about what on earth is completely messed up with all these systems, how are we failing, right? That type of conversation, I don't feel the judgment that some people feel when we talk about failures of system, right? Some people, and it makes sense, they take it really personally, they internalize it, and all good, right? So I embrace the fact that government is not working as folks expect it to, and it's just not delivering how folks need it to, right? Just not at all. And so in those moments, I thought to myself, oh, how you change that is through political leadership, you run a campaign, et cetera. And so that was the trajectory. And what I realized, though, in being up close with political leadership, and there are incredible political leaders, especially here in Oregon, and actually now that I've been at the federal level across the country, there are incredibly effective values-based political leaders. But the work, the action, the operations, how did we actually become the first state in Oregon to have the highest Black rate of vaccine? How did we, in the country, right? Oregon became the first state to have a Black vaccine rate that was higher than our white counterparts, right? That was unique. That was huge. That was big, especially with the disparities of death and hospitalizations, right? So the actual operations, it doesn't happen with the politically elected folks. And through mentors and through folks who are around me, what I was able to learn is that my skill set and where I'm best positioned is in that operations, is in those teams, is helping manage a 6,000 person agency, right? Helping to support and pick the right people, feel the things in somebody who somebody hasn't seen before and say, oh, wow, why is it that you've been put on the bench? Why is it that you actually aren't the one who's the shooting guard right now? Like, you actually have those skills. You know how to question, you know how to bring a team together. Those skill sets might not have been valued previously, but man, get in here right now and let's start mucking things up. Let's do this together. So it was really more of a shift of, I don't feel like I will be as effective in what I want to do. And also, it's just not my skill set. My skill set is not going out and talking to a bunch of people and then not doing something about it. Like, for me, I'm like, I can't just go to the next listening session, because guess what? We just heard something from a bunch of people who's told us these things for probably like 80 years. They've told us the same things over and over again that we haven't done anything about. So I don't want to contribute to that. I don't want to continue that. I want to be able to take what it is that we heard and say, all right, what can we do about this? What can't we do about this? And the moment we say we can't do something about it, let's go tell them. Let's go tell people, so that they aren't just left there hanging, continuing to knock on the door to say, why haven't you done anything about it? And we've been too scared to say, actually, we can't. Actually, this is what needs to happen. Actually, go talk to your legislator about X, Y, or Z, right? Like, we don't have to stay stuck in this space of like, I couldn't help. What makes it worse is then not telling somebody, right? Because nobody likes that. Nobody likes to have their information taken from them, extracted from them, whatever terminology you want to use, and then never hear back. It's just not a helpful place to be. So that was really my shift, right? And I learned so much. I went through Emerge Oregon, which is this incredible organization, right? National organization that trains women how to run for office. It was unbelievably helpful. It helped my network. It helped me. I gained mentors. It's an incredible opportunity, and it really does remarkable things to help values-based women in particular become leaders, right? And it helps them build that network. It helps them be surrounded by people who also value like gut thinking, like how to do things differently, right? All of those kinds of things. And I just realized that's not necessarily the trajectory that I wanted to take. That's me in a nutshell.
Yeah. And then to follow up with Tanis' second question.
Yeah, thank you.
So looking back, again, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Oh my gosh. Keep playing basketball? No, I'm just kidding. So it all goes back. I'm on repeat, I know, but it really is. It is this trust your gut. Like there have been incredible articles talking about how, right, what our bodies are actually doing all day long, right? Memory is not just something in the brain. Memory is actually located throughout your body. Feelings stay in your body. Your great-grandparents' experiences have come through generations. They are in your body. And these are things that cultures have known for a very, very, very long time. And that has really like kind of been deprogrammed out of us, right? A lot of times we're just set to do a series of things. We're expected to go to law school. We're expected to, whatever it is that expectation is placed on us. And so then that's the world that we see, and that's the like kind of narrow focus that we have. But there's something in us. I have yet to meet somebody where I haven't figured out or I haven't engaged in a conversation where they had that internal pause, where they had that moment of reflection, where they had that like, I didn't think about it. Oh, yeah, that was what I wanted to do when I was 3. Oh, yeah, that actually was this experience that I had. Oh, yeah, why did I lose that? Why did I lose track of that? And for me, it's like, how do you connect somebody back to that person, back to that feeling? Because when that becomes centered again in you, it is incredible but what you can do. Because all of a sudden, you're not fighting against yourself that you didn't even know you were fighting against. So for me, it is always about trusting that. It's about trusting that. It's about stop being so timid, about speaking out even if you don't know what you're going to say. That for me was big, right? That perfection mentality of having to know what I'm going to say if I'm going to raise my hand, something like that. No, actually, just take a second. Tell folks you're not ready to move on, and that's perfectly enough. In fact, it's probably more than enough because other folks are likely feeling that too. But also, even if other folks aren't, I'm worthy. I'm valuing myself enough to say, I'm not getting it. And if there's a reason I'm in this room, then there's a reason that I need to speak up. So that to me is what it is a lot about, is like, how do we encourage folks to like get back to that like body, mind, whatever, well-being, whatever we're calling it these days, to actually then act on that and feel supported in that and grow in that, because it's not always going to be right. Like you got to figure out how to grow into that and trust it in different ways. But that's what I always encourage folks that I'm with is figuring out. And the one other thing that I will share is there are things that we all do that are tells, right? And that people around us actually do see them and notice them. We don't always see them. And Zoom has been this incredible, cool thing for folks to really see your face, right? So as an example, I constantly talk like this. I never get flustered. I never, right? So all during COVID, this is how I am. I'm engaged, da, da, da. But apparently what I do when folks are not, when we're not being in service, when we're messing things up, right? So when we're not doing things that we should be doing and that we aren't acting fast enough or whatever, I flip my hair, and my staff would tell me the deeper the flip, the more they knew we needed to change directions. It was pretty funny. And so I was able to watch myself on camera, and I was like, oh boy, I even did the side flip. We're right. And that's kind of an extreme version, but we all have them, right? And so people, if I'm a hand talker, so if I'm not talking with my hands, that means something's going, I'm not connected to whatever it is, right? You nod your head, right? There's just a lot of cues that we can help. And the moment you recognize that cue in somebody, we're now connecting at a different level. So then let's go into that level, right? Let's have that kind of conversation. So for me, it's trusting yourself, and it is just really about figuring out what is it that's inside of you that I want to help us uncover, and like, let's go do that. Let's not deal with the other stuff. Let's go do that. That's kind of me.
Well, and this podcast is called Hiring for Good. Mm-hmm. And it means different things to different people. So what does it mean to you?
Yeah. So I love that the title is ambiguous. And so for me, it is literally that question, right? For me, I'm going to not answer your question because that's who I am, because it's never about me. So for me, it's this beautiful conversation opportunity. Like for me, it is, what does that mean for you? Like how does that what does that turn into for you? Does hiring for good mean those values? Right? It's just, there's this whole range. And so, I mean, for me in service, what good means is always defined by the person that I'm trying to serve. It is never defined by me ever. It never, ever should. I should have nothing to do with this other than doing the thing that you're asking me to do. Like really, truly, right? I don't need this thing. I'm not the one who knows how to access it. You do. So good for me means, what does the community, what does Oregon, what does whomever, how are they defining it in this moment? And then how do we actually make sure that we tailor it to their needs, what they've identified? So that to me is what's critical.
Well, yeah, what a pleasure. I love the idea of, good as a fluid term. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you very much for all these wonderful thoughts and ideas, and a really beautiful sensibility that you're bringing to public leadership.
Well, I appreciate you all.
And I think, I was reflecting when you were talking about your values. I'm like, I think another one you forgot to mention was accountability. You want to be accountable really quickly, and that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Dawn, again, thank you so much. Yeah. And we may bring you back for a secondary conversation.
Anytime.
Awesome.
I'm here for it. Yeah.
Well, thank you. This was Hiring for Good. Don't forget to follow, rate, review, and subscribe. And we are just very grateful for your time here today.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. And the team here. Oh my gosh, this is incredible. It's remarkable.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today at Hiring for Good. If you were inspired by our conversation, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you want to learn more about our executive search services, check us out at www.hiringforgood.net or our company website, Acumen Executive Search.
Thanks so much, and don't forget to join us next time for another in-depth conversation about transformational leadership. Until then, have fun.